My name is Brianna, and I'm 57 years old. As I sit here trying to find the words to tell you about what happened to me, my heart aches with a longing so deep it feels like drowning. People look at me strangely when I try to explain the depression that settled over me after I came back from the hospital. They think I should be grateful, happy to be alive. But they don't understand. I've been to the most beautiful place that exists, and now I'm back here, trying to live in a world that feels gray and empty compared to where I've been. Before we continue, please let me know where you're listening from. It would be nice to feel closer, even if we're physically apart. Also, don't forget to like. It will help this video to reach so many people who need to listen to this testimony, and leave a comment. Share your thoughts about this near-death experience testimony. Let's have a fair and open discussion so we can learn from each other here on this channel, and don't forget to subscribe for more of this content coming your way. Enjoy listening. The doctors called it a miracle. My family called it a blessing. But for months after my recovery, all I could think about was returning to that place of pure love and light. I know how that sounds. I know people think I'm crazy, or that the lack of oxygen damaged my brain. But what I experienced was more real than anything I've ever known in this life, and trying to live without that overwhelming love feels like trying to breathe underwater. Let me start from the beginning, though. Maybe if I tell you my whole story, you'll understand why coming back was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I grew up in Slidell, Louisiana, in a house that always smelled like motor oil and coffee. My daddy ran a small trucking business, and from the time I could barely reach the dashboard, I was riding along with him on his routes. Those long days on the road taught me about hard work and responsibility. While other kids my age were playing with dolls, I was learning how to check tire pressure and read shipping manifests. Brianna, you got to pull your weight in this world. Daddy would tell me as we drove through the humid Louisiana countryside. Nobody's gonna hand you nothing, so you better know how to work for what you want. Those words shaped me more than any sermon I ever heard in church. By the time I was 16, I could back a semi-trailer into a loading dock better than most grown men. The work was hard, but there was something satisfying about it. Something real and honest about using your hands and your back to make a living. When I turned 19, I made a decision that surprised everyone who knew me. I walked into the Army recruitment office in New Orleans and signed my name on the dotted line. Maybe it was the discipline I'd learned from Daddy, or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I could do anything I set my mind to, but something about military service called to me. The next 6 years of my life were a whirlwind of training and travel. I earned my airborne wings, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes because that's what the job required. I served in Germany, where the cold bit through every layer of clothing I owned, and in Korea, where the landscape was so different from Louisiana that I might as well have been on another planet. The Army taught me things about myself I never knew. I learned I was stronger than I thought, more resilient than I'd imagined. But more than that, it gave me a sense of purpose. Every morning when I put on that uniform, I knew I was part of something bigger than myself. When I received my honorable discharge after 6 years, I felt proud of what I'd accomplished, but I also felt a little lost. What do you do when the thing that defined you for so long suddenly ends? The answer came to me the first time I climbed into the cab of a bulldozer. If the Army had taught me discipline and strength, heavy equipment taught me passion. There's something almost spiritual about operating a massive machine, feeling its power respond to your touch, watching it move earth and shape the landscape according to your will. For years, my life revolved around construction sites and long work days. I'd wake up before dawn, spend 12 or 14 hours running dozers and excavators, then fall into bed exhausted, only to do it all again the next day. The work consumed me, but I loved it. There's an honesty in construction work. You can see what you've accomplished at the end of each day. You've moved this pile of dirt, carved out this foundation, cleared this path. It's real and solid and permanent in a way that few things in life are. The work took me all over the country. I built roads in Texas, cleared land in Colorado, worked on pipeline projects from Oklahoma to North Dakota. But in the fall of 2018, I found myself in Pratt, Kansas, working on a wind farm project. The prairie stretched out endlessly in every direction, and the wind never seemed to stop blowing. It was beautiful in its own stark way, but also lonely. I'd been working longer hours than usual, pushing myself harder than I probably should have. The project was behind schedule, and there was pressure to get the turbine foundations poured before winter set in. I was running on coffee and determination, ignoring the small signs my body was trying to send me. The first warning came as chest pressure, a tight feeling like someone was squeezing my ribs. Then my left arm started to ache, a dull pain that ran from my shoulder to my fingertips. But I'd had chest pains before, years earlier, and the doctors had told me it was just stress and heartburn. I was only 55, in good shape from all the physical work I did. Heart problems were for old men who sat behind desks all day, not for someone like me. So I ignored the symptoms and kept working. That decision nearly cost me everything, and paradoxically, it also gave me everything. It happened one Saturday morning. I was operating a D8 dozer, pushing dirt around one of the turbine sites, when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The chest pressures I'd been ignoring exploded into agony, like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart with a giant fist. My left arm went numb, and I couldn't catch my breath. I managed to shut down the dozer and climb out of the cab, but my legs gave out as soon as my feet hit the ground. The last thing I remember was lying on my back in the Kansas dirt, staring up at a sky so blue it hurt my eyes, thinking this was a strange place to die. Then I was floating. Not floating like in water, but floating like I'd become weightless, like gravity had simply forgotten about me. I looked down and saw my body lying motionless on the ground, saw my coworkers running toward me, heard someone shouting to call 911. But I felt completely detached from it all, like I was watching someone else's emergency unfold. I drifted upward, past the half-built wind turbines, past the clouds, until I was surrounded by stars. But these weren't the cold, distant stars you see at night. These stars were alive, pulsing with warmth and music and something that felt like joy. I could have stayed there forever, floating among them, but something was pulling me forward. I found myself standing at the entrance to a cave unlike anything I'd ever seen. The opening was vast, tall enough for giants to walk through, and carved from stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light. As I stepped inside, my footsteps echoed in the enormous space, but the echoes sounded like music. The cave stretched on further than I could see, and running down the center was a walkway made of stones that looked like they'd been polished by countless feet over countless years. At the far end, so distant it seemed like a mirage, was a door. I couldn't make out the details, but I knew with absolute certainty that I needed to reach it. As I walked along the stone path, I became aware that I wasn't alone. There was a presence beside me, keeping pace with my steps. When I turned to look, I saw a figure that seemed to be made of light and shadow at the same time, solid enough to cast a shadow, but translucent enough that I could see through it. The figure never spoke, but I felt its kindness like a warm hand on my shoulder. The door, when I finally reached it, was enormous and made of wood so old it seemed to have existed since the beginning of time. Without hesitation, I pushed it open and stepped through. The light that greeted me on the other side defies every word I know. It wasn't bright in a harsh way. It didn't hurt my eyes or make me squint. Instead, it felt like being embraced by pure love. The light had weight and texture and personality. It wrapped around me like the warmest blanket, soaked through my skin like sunshine, filled every empty space inside me with a peace so complete, I wondered how I'd ever lived without it. In that light, I felt forgiveness for every mistake I'd ever made, love for every part of myself I'd ever hated, acceptance so total it brought me to my knees. All the walls I'd built around my heart, all the ways I'd learned to protect myself from being hurt, they just dissolved. I wasn't Brianna the truck driver's daughter, or Brianna the soldier, or Brianna the heavy equipment operator. I was just a soul, beloved and perfect and home. I don't know how long I stayed in that light. Time didn't seem to exist there, or maybe it existed differently. But eventually, I felt myself moving again, floating over what looked like the edge of a cliff. Below me stretched a garden more beautiful than anything I'd ever imagined. The flowers in this garden were alive in a way that earthly flowers aren't. Each bloom pulsed with its own light, its own song, its own personality. As I floated among them, I could feel their joy, their love, their absolute contentment with being exactly what they were created to be. A rose wasn't trying to be a lily. A lily wasn't jealous of a sunflower. Each flower was perfect in its own unique way, and together they created a symphony of beauty that made my soul weep with gratitude. I wanted to stay in that garden forever, to become one of those perfect flowers, but something was calling me upward again. I found myself rising into a space filled with lights that moved and danced like living beings. These weren't just points of light, they were conscious, intelligent, full of personality and purpose. 4 of the largest lights began to move toward each other, spinning and merging until they formed a single being of such magnificence that I can barely find words to describe it. This being was made entirely of light, but light that somehow conveyed perfect love, infinite wisdom, and power beyond comprehension. When it looked at me, and somehow I knew it was looking at me even though it had no eyes I could see, I felt known completely. Every thought I'd ever had, every choice I'd ever made, every secret I'd ever kept, this being knew it all and loved me anyway. The next thing I knew, someone was pounding on my chest. I opened my eyes to see a paramedic's face inches from mine, sweat dripping from his forehead as he performed CPR. The beautiful light was gone, replaced by the harsh Kansas sun and the concerned faces of my coworkers. "She's back," the medic said, relief evident in his voice. "We lost you there for a minute, Brianna. You were gone for almost 4 minutes. For minutes. In those 4 minutes, I had experienced what felt like hours or days in that other realm. The disconnect between what I'd experienced and the time that had passed left me feeling disoriented and strangely disappointed. I had been somewhere perfect, and now I was back in a world of pain and limitation. The helicopter ride to the hospital in Wichita was a blur of medical equipment and urgent voices. But somewhere over the Kansas prairie, it happened again. I felt that familiar sensation of floating up and out of my body, looking down at the paramedics working frantically over my still form in the helicopter. This time, I felt no attachment to the body they were trying to save. It looked small and unimportant lying there on the stretcher. I felt only curiosity about where I would go next. I found myself in another garden, but this one was different from the first. Instead of individual flowers, I saw a perfect circle of blooms, each one representing a different human soul. There were flowers of every color imaginable, deep reds and bright yellows, soft pastels and rich purples, pure whites and midnight blues. Some were large and showy, others small and delicate, but each one was perfect and beautiful and necessary to complete the circle. As I looked at this circle of flowers, understanding flooded through me like a river. Each flower represented not just a soul, but a race, a culture, a way of being human. The red flowers weren't better than the yellow ones. The large blooms weren't more important than the small ones. They were all part of the same garden, all drawing from the same soil, all reaching toward the same sun. In that moment, I understood something that changed me forever. There is no such thing as race or nationality or religion in the realm of the soul. Those are just costumes we wear while we're here on earth, roles we play in the great drama of existence. Underneath it all, we are all flowers in the same divine garden. The vision shifted, and I found myself looking at what appeared to be a planet, but not like any planet I'd ever seen in pictures. This world glowed with an inner blue light, hyper-real and more vivid than anything in our physical universe. As I watched, images began flashing before me, scenes of creation, of life beginning, of knowledge and wisdom being planted like seeds throughout the cosmos. I saw the beginning of everything, the moment when love itself decided to create, to experience itself through countless forms and beings. I saw the purpose behind suffering, the reason for joy, the intricate web of connection that links every living thing. It was too much for my human mind to fully grasp, but for those precious moments I understood it all. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I slammed back into my body with a force that left me gasping and disoriented. The intensive care unit of the hospital came into focus around me. Machines beeping, nurses bustling, the smell of antiseptic sharp in my nostrils. Over the next few days, as the doctors ran their tests and marveled at my survival, I learned just how close I had come to dying. They called it a widowmaker heart attack, the kind that kills 95% of people who have them. My main coronary artery had been completely blocked. By all medical logic, I should have died on that construction site in Kansas. But I hadn't died. Against all odds, I had survived without any permanent damage to my heart. The doctors called it a miracle, and maybe it was. But as I lay in that hospital bed, listening to their amazement at my recovery, all I could think about was how desperately I wanted to go back to that beautiful place. The depression that followed my recovery was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. People expected me to be grateful, to celebrate my second chance at life. Instead, I felt like I was grieving the loss of something infinitely precious. The world around me seemed flat and colorless compared to the vivid reality of what I'd experienced. Food had no taste. Music sounded hollow. Even the sunset, which had always been one of my favorite sights, looked pale and lifeless. I tried to explain to my family and friends what I had seen, but the words always fell short. How do you describe light that has personality? How do you explain love that has physical weight? How do you convey the feeling of being completely known and completely accepted? I sounded crazy even to myself. The longing to return to that place consumed me. I would lie awake at night, trying to recapture even a fraction of the peace I had felt there. Sometimes I would catch myself hoping for another heart attack, another chance to slip away from this world and back to that one. That's when I knew I needed help. I started researching other people who had had near-death experiences, and what I found saved my life in a different way than the paramedics had. Story after story of people who had experienced the same things I had, the light, the love, the profound sense of coming home. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. What I had experienced was real, and others had been there too. Reading their accounts helped me understand that the depression I was feeling was normal, even common among people who had returned from near-death experiences. The contrast between the perfect love of that realm and the often harsh reality of this world is jarring beyond description. But slowly, as I connected with others who had been where I'd been, I began to find my way back to life. The experience changed everything about how I see the world and my place in it. The religious teachings I'd grown up with, the focus on judgment and punishment, the emphasis on being better than others, the fear-based approach to spirituality, none of that resonated anymore. What I had experienced was pure love, not conditional love based on following the right rules or believing the right things. I began to see people differently. When I looked at someone, I didn't see their race or their religion or their social status. I saw a soul, a beautiful flower in the divine garden, playing their part in the great story of existence. The homeless man on the street corner wasn't a failure or a burden. He was a fellow soul having a difficult human experience. The wealthy businessman wasn't more blessed or more worthy. He was just a soul wearing different clothes. This new way of seeing people wasn't always easy. It challenged everything I thought I knew about success and failure, about good and bad, about who deserved love and who didn't. But it also freed me from the exhausting work of judging others and trying to prove my own worth. We're all in this together, all part of the same infinite tapestry of existence. As the months passed, I began to understand that my experience hadn't been just for me. I had been given a glimpse of the truth that lies beyond this physical world, and with that gift came a responsibility. I needed to share what I had learned, not to convince anyone of anything, but to offer hope to those who were struggling, comfort to those who were grieving, and reassurance to those who wondered if their lives had meaning. I started speaking about my experience, first to small groups of people dealing with their own near-death experiences, then to anyone who would listen. I wasn't trying to convert anyone to a particular religion or belief system. I was simply sharing what I had seen. That we are all infinitely loved, that death is not the end but a transition, and that the purpose of our time here on earth is to learn to love each other the way we are loved in that realm. The message I bring back from that beautiful place is simple but profound. Everything is about love. Not the complicated, conditional love we often experience in this world, but the pure, unconditional love that is the foundation of all existence. We're here to help each other, to serve each other, to learn to see past the surface differences that seem so important and recognize the divine spark in every being we encounter. This understanding has transformed how I live my life. I still work. I still operate heavy equipment and take pride in doing good work, but I'm not consumed by it anymore. I don't work 14-hour days trying to prove my worth through productivity. I make time for the things that matter, connecting with people, offering help where I can, sharing my story with those who need to hear it. I've let go of most of the material things that once seemed so important. The need to accumulate possessions, to achieve status, to build a perfect life. All of that faded away when I experienced the perfect love of that other realm. What matters now is how I treat people, how I respond to their needs, how I contribute to the healing and growth of the world around me. The depression that followed my return has mostly lifted, though I still feel moments of profound homesickness for that beautiful place. But I've come to understand that my longing isn't meant to drive me away from this life. It's meant to transform how I live this life. It's a reminder of what we're all moving toward, a glimpse of the love that awaits us all when our earthly journey is complete. I'm 57 years old, and I've learned that age is just a number marking time in this temporary existence. What defines us isn't how long we live, but how deeply we love. What matters isn't what we accomplish by worldly standards, but how we serve each other along the way. When people ask me what the most important thing I learned from my experience is, I always give them the same answer. We're here to help each other. That's it. That's the whole purpose of this life. Everything else, the career ambitions, the material goals, the social hierarchies we create, they're all just distractions from the real work we're supposed to be doing. In that realm of perfect love, I wasn't asked about my job title or my bank account or my achievements. I was simply loved, completely and unconditionally, for the soul that I am. And if that's how we're loved there, then that's how we should love each other here. So I try to live each day with that understanding. When I meet someone new, I try to see past their exterior to the soul beneath. When someone is difficult or unkind, I try to remember that they're fighting battles I know nothing about, and they need love, not judgment. When I'm faced with a choice between serving myself or serving others, I try to choose service. It's not always easy. This world can be harsh and discouraging, and sometimes the old patterns of thinking try to reassert themselves. But then I remember that beautiful place, that overwhelming love, that perfect peace, and I'm reminded of what we're all moving toward. This life is temporary, but love is eternal. As I finish telling you my story, my heart is full of gratitude, not just for the experience itself, but for the opportunity to share it with you. If my words have touched you in any way, if they've given you hope or comfort or a new way of seeing the world, then my purpose has been fulfilled. We're all on this journey together, all souls learning to love, all flowers in the same divine garden. We're here to help each other grow, to support each other through the difficult seasons, and to celebrate each other's unique beauty. In the end, that's all that matters. Thank you for listening to this testimony. If you have been blessed, please kindly share to someone else you would love to hear this message. Also like and subscribe to this channel for more of this testimony coming your way.